Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Angela Greiling-Keene. I'm the 106th president of the National Press Club and a reporter for Bloomberg News. We are the world's leading professional organization for journalists, committed to our profession's future with programming such as events like this, while fostering a free press worldwide. For more information about the National Press Club, please visit our website at www.press.org. To donate to programs offered to the public through our National Press Club Journalism Institute, please visit press.org/institute. On behalf of our members worldwide, I would like to welcome our speaker today, as well as those of you in our audience. Our head table includes guests of our speaker, as well as working journalists who are club members. And if you hear applause from the audience, I'd note that members of the general public are also attending, so it's not necessarily evidence of a lack of journalistic objectivity. I'd also like to welcome our C-SPAN and public radio audiences. You can follow the action today on Twitter using the hashtag NPCLunch. After our guest speech concludes, we'll have a question and answer period. I will ask as many questions as time permits. Now it's time to introduce our head table. I would ask each of you to stand briefly as your name is announced. From your right, Kevin Wensing, a committee member for the Vietnam War commemoration. Glenn Marcus, a documentary filmmaker. Maureen Grappi, a Washington correspondent for Gannett. Colonel John O'Shea, U.S. Army retired congressional liaison, Office of the Secretary of the Air Force, and a member of the National Press Club. Thomas Burr, senior Washington correspondent for the Salt Lake Tribune and chairman of the board of the National Press Club. Jim Michaels, military reporter for USA Today. Lieutenant General Bill Ingram, Director of the Army National Guard, skipping over the podium. Donna Linduan-Leger, a reporter for USA Today, the organizer of today's lunch on our Speakers Committee, and the 2009 president of the National Press Club. Skipping over our speaker momentarily, Rachel Oswald, a reporter at National Journal's Global Security Newswire and a vice chairwoman of the club's Press Freedom Committee. Brigadier General James Witham, Deputy Director of the Air National Guard. Mary French, the recently retired Editor-in-Chief of Army Magazine. Chief Master Sergeant Mitch Brush, Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chief of the National Guard Bureau. Will Watson, a retired daily newspaper editor, President of the Watson Group, a veteran of the South Carolina Air National Guard, and a member of the National Press Club's American Legion Post. And John Fales, better known as Sergeant Shaft, who is a columnist at military.com. As the Defense Department ponders how to create a leaner, less costly military force without compromising capabilities and readiness, our guest today points to the National Guard as a key part of the solution. Today's National Guard, General Frank J. Grass says, is, quote, the most competent, relevant, and battle-tested National Guard in the history of the nation. In testimony before the Senate Defense Appropriations Committee last year, he called the Guard a, quote, cost-effective, proven solution, unquote, that allows the nation, quote, to maintain a robust military at the least possible cost to the taxpayer. The September 11, 2001 terror attacks on the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Washington pushed the citizen warriors of the National Guard, more accustomed to responding to U.S. natural disasters, to the front lines of two foreign wars. In addition to Iraq and Afghanistan, National Guard personnel have deployed to Libya, Kosovo, and other hotspots around the world. But nothing illustrates the Guard's dual role better than Monday in Illinois, when Governor Pat Quinn activated his state's National Guard to assist residents hit by a ferocious winter storm, while another Illinois National Guard unit was activated for deployment to Kuwait. Congress recognized the Guard's key role in the 2012 Defense Authorization Act when it elevated the head of the National Guard Bureau to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the military advisors to President Obama and his national security team. But the Guard's future is uncertain. This fall, as Congress tussled over the budget, the Guard faced potential sequestration cuts that would have pared the force by more than 10%. Such cuts, Army Chief of Staff Ray Odierno told Congress then, would make it challenging for the military to meet its goal of successfully operating in 2 theaters of war simultaneously. And the Guard has also had to deal with complicated issues on the home front. In November, General Grass vowed to push uncooperative state National Guard bureaus to comply with Defense Department directives to extend equal benefits to all married couples, including same-sex couples. General Grass began his National Guard career in October 1969 when he enlisted in the Missouri Army National Guard. After graduating from Officer Candidate School, he was commissioned as an officer in the Engineer Corps in 1981. General Grass earned his 4th star in 2012 when he became the 27th Chief of the National Guard Bureau. Besides advising the President, he was responsible for ensuring that the more than 460,000 Army and Air National Guard personnel are accessible, trained, and ready to protect the homeland and provide combat resources to the Army and Air Force. To tell us how the National Guard transformation will continue, please join me in giving a warm National Press Club welcome to National Guard Bureau Chief General Frank J. Grass.
Angela, thank you so much. Every time somebody says, you joined in '69, you're an old guy. It makes me feel old, but actually, and I'll talk a little bit about that, the Guard today, from 1969 to today, it is pretty amazing, and I know there's a number of folks and friends in this room that have lived through this transition of the Guard going from what was truly a strategic reserve back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, to what became a premier force, a premier fighting force, both for at home and overseas. And what I thought I would do today, first, talk about 3 things. One being where the Guard is today, a little bit about our homeland mission and the things that occur, and Angela just mentioned, just recently with the winter storm and how we were able to roll out quickly like we do all the time in the Guard. But then also talk about the Army and Air Force and our roles in the Army and Air Force on the federal mission, and then a little bit about our enduring partnerships that we do. Before I do that, though, I want to thank you for what you do. When I was a lieutenant, if I saw a reporter, I usually wanted to run the other direction. When I was a major, I was kind of like working at the Army Guard Readiness Center. It was like, do I have to deal with those folks? When I was a lieutenant colonel, my next thought was, well, I better get in this game. Where's a public affairs officer? What do they do? As a general, and the staff here that I have, our public affairs staff, has been phenomenal. If you can't tell your story, you're no good at what you do. And so I want to applaud all of you and thank you for the opportunity to be here, first of all, but also for what you do to tell the story, of the nation's military, defense in general. This population of warriors that we have, men and women in the United States military today, which makes up about 0.73% of our population. 1%, less than 1% of our population serves in uniform any given day. And as I've got a chance in 17 months now on the job, I've traveled to 25 states, 5 countries, some of those twice, some in the combat zone to visit our troops. And our troops in general, active guard and reserve, every service, they are phenomenal. They are the best this nation has to offer. And so as we move forward with the current budget crisis, we've got to make sure we don't break this. And I know General Odierno was here the other day, and I worked very closely with him and with General Welsh and with Secretary Hagel and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So we've got to get this right. We owe that to our nation, we in uniform and our civilian leadership as well. So what is this Guard today? Well, for 377 years now, we've been rolling out of the gates of our armories whenever the governors call. In some cases, even before the governors call. I've seen situations where there's a disaster. I remember my first state active duty in 1973 coming out. Actually, I was driving with my wife at the time. We were dating, and we were headed to a dinner. And on the local radio was, hey, flooding, 220th Engineers, get to your armory immediately. There was no governor order. We just turned and said, hon, you're going to have to take the car and go to dinner by yourself because I've got to go somewhere. But that today is what our Guard men and women do still every day. you know, reading about in the last few days our daily update and looking at mechanics that went into Illinois to help repair snowplows. The civilians, you know, the state trucks, they went in to help out because the trucks were running so many hours, they didn't have enough mechanics. The highway assistance teams in Indiana that went out to check on people that were broke down, that couldn't get out, to help them move along the interstate highway systems. And it goes on and on and on of these men and women that do this every day. And just in the last 16 months since I've been here, Hurricane Sandy was the first event. 12,000 guardsmen rolled out the gate out of 22 states total. Some states rolled in to help New York, New Jersey, and West Virginia that was having a snow event during Sandy. And it was seamless. And sitting in my chair, I thought, you know, I don't have to do anything. I just watch this occur, and I go up and get to shake hands and visit the great men and women, see who they are. You know, I'm in West Virginia, or I'm in New Jersey in this small cell of about 20 soldiers and airmen. The sergeant in there and the lieutenant, I meet them and talk to them a little bit. And the lieutenant is also a deputy sheriff in the town next door, so he knew everyone in the community. And that is who your Guard is, how it's always been. And again, we don't want to break that. Some folks in the room here have already been recognized from the Guard. I do want to recognize my counterpart here, who's been a Guardsman. And I'm not going to ask him how many state active duties he has had, but the director of the Air National Guard, Bill Ingram, and I have worked together for years, even before he was the TAG of North Carolina. Bill could probably tell you all kinds of stories and knows more about fighting and responding to hurricanes probably than most of us ever even begin to think we would know. And Bill's going to be retiring here, well over 40 years of service here in the end of this month, and just been a great partner here, both from his time working in the state and also state active duty and mobilizations. Whatever we needed, he was there for us, and now running the Army National Guard for well over 2 years. So I want to talk a little bit about the federal mission of the Guard, because I get asked the question all the time about why does the National Guard need F-16s? Why do you need F-15s? Why do you need Apaches? Why do you need tanks? I always say we don't need tanks, and we don't need Apaches, and we don't need fighter jets. What we need is whatever the Air Force and the Army need in their reserve. Because our first mission, and our two missions are equal, is our mission to support the Federal Reserve of the Air Force, United States Air Force, and United States Army. So however the Army looks, or however the Air Force looks, we've got to be interchangeable. We'll never be identical to them. We're not going to be and not try to be. And they will never be identical to us because of that homeland mission where we roll out the gate. But we've got to be complementary of each other so that when the Air Force needs additional capability in the fighter jets, or whether it's a support skill set, or the Army needs additional brigades, that we've got to be ready to move. That means being organized, trained, and equipped the same. And I can honestly tell you today, our readiness is higher than it's ever been in the Army and Air National Guard. And we are organized, trained, and equipped at a level higher than I've ever seen it in my 44 years of service. That's because of a lot of great investment by the nation throughout the war. The real challenge is how do you balance that now in this fiscal environment and not lose that edge, not lose that equipment. The Air Force mission, very unique. Within 72 hours, any Air National Guard unit can deploy today. And they've got to be ready to deploy. That's overseas. But if you look at the homeland, where's my good friend J.C. Witham there from the Air National Guard? We have 40 fighters and 7 tankers setting on alert right now that if something happens over the skies of the United States, there's pilots in jets, there's ground crews getting those jets up in the skies, 6 minutes. They're over the skies of the United States. 24/7, we've been doing that as a part of the North American Aerospace Defense Command mission. So that mission of the Air Force is unique from an Army mission, which takes more horsepower to get it up and going. But the Air Force does that mission very well, and we've got a great partnership with Mark Welsh. On the Army mission, depending on what skill set you need, if you need support personnel, my branch, for example, if you need engineers, most of our engineers have got some civilian background in engineering in some way. I just visited during the Colorado floods. I went out and visited during the crisis, I flew in some helicopters. We had a mix of active helicopters plugged into the Colorado Guard, working with them, and the Wyoming Guard came in. I think we had 23 Chinooks and Black Hawk combinations at the peak, pulling people off the side of the mountains. And I went back later, which you probably didn't see on the news, is after the floods went down, 4 states rolled in with National Guard out of the Air and Army, and they were engineers, and they reopened the road in record time between Lyons, Colorado, up to Estes Park. And I drove it a couple times after they opened. And I thought when I first went out there, they finished the project about a month early. And the intent was get that road open so utility workers could get in, so that people could get back to their lives and begin to recover. So I thought I would drive that road and see maybe a gravel road up alongside the mountain. It was 25 miles long. There were 18 major washouts, some of them the size of this room. Well, 6 weeks after the flood, I drove that road on a 24-foot wide paved road that was striped. Now, there's some areas they'll come back in the spring, they'll have to rebuild, but the Guard came together and stayed active duty. The Federal Highway Administration funded it, and the Colorado Department of Transportation did the paving. Pretty amazing. So I go in, I said, how do you make all this work? So this lieutenant colonel comes up to me from the Colorado Guard, and he's riding with the Colorado Department of Transportation. And I said, so what did you do? He goes, well, he says, I know I've got a uniform on now, but he says, my civilian job, I'm a highway engineer for the Federal Highway Administration. So I gathered up the Colorado team, and I gathered up the Department of Transportation, and I said, look, I can figure this out. If the government will do this request, we can get this 100% financed, and we can work together, bring the contractors in, and make this thing go. And the Guard can come in and do the rough work up front. We'll do the finish on top. That's who your Guard is. So if you're going to deploy overseas, you bring that extra skill set in every job out there. And I just, in November, went to Afghanistan, and while I was there, I met with one of the generals, and he says, I want to introduce you to somebody. And the colonel comes in the room, and I look at the colonel, and I see that he's got a National Guard patch from from California. I said, oh, what unit? He says, oh, 40th ID. I said, what do you do as a civilian? He says, I'm a lawyer. I said, what do you do here? He says, I'm a provincial governor advisor on how to set up rule of law. And again, that's the 2 skill sets we always bring into every environment. So when we're talking about support skill sets, depending on what you want, what you need in conflict, the Guard can deliver. If we're talking about brigade combat teams fighting in combat, right now the standard that we're using, and it's an Army standard, is 50 to 80 days we can have a brigade combat team ready to go. Now, some of those brigades are harder to train than others. To synchronize a combat brigade of tanks and Bradleys with air support takes a bit longer. So we say the worst case, especially as we go down and resources become dwindling, will probably be 80 to 110 days. We can have a brigade combat team. And that's using the Army standard. But today, most of them are certifying anywhere from 50 to 80 days of training. The engineer units I just talked about, most of those are going to go through 30 to 45 days training. The further we get away from the current conflict, that'll get stretched out a bit, but we want to make sure we don't lose that edge. The unique thing about the Guard is the constitutional structure, of how this started in 1636 with both being able to support the civilian government and support the president when called upon. And we've created some opportunities in the future that will continue to grow in the homeland response that are unique from what we had. If you remember Hurricane Katrina, we didn't have a unity of effort and a unity of command. We didn't have a structure. And I want to share that with you because today we do have that unity of command and unity of structure. And it's hinged in a concept called the dual status commander. So we pre-train and pre-certify a National Guard 1-star who then can command and control active Guard reserve forces. I'll go back to the Colorado example. During the floods, when Fort Carson said, hey, we've got helicopters, we know people need to be rescued, Mike Edwards, the Adjutant General of Colorado, he sends a note up to us and to General Jacoby at Northcom and says, I want to stand up a dual status command. General Jacoby sends in a staff for the Title 10, the federal side of the mission. Colorado stood up their normal Title 32, their state mission, and this one commander commanded all of those 23 helicopters and gave them direction. And we had to get that approval from Secretary of Defense, but that happens all the time now. We do that pretty routinely, both for crisis. We've done it for years for planned events like a Democratic convention or a Republican convention or an inauguration, but now we do it for crisis events. That leads me to the last comment I just want to share with you and get to the questions, but this is all about partnerships. So much of this in the Homeland is about partnerships. Because when we roll in to assist a community, we're not in charge. We're supporting somebody. It's an incident commander, it's a fire chief, it's a police chief, and we want to make sure that when we do roll in there, that our soldiers, no matter whether they're, guards going to be the first one in, if we bring in any active with us under that dual status construct, we want to make sure that everyone understands we are in support of that first responder. And our job, and I've talked to Administrator Fugate, he has relayed this over and over to me, that our job is to make that first responder successful. So whatever they need, that first responder, that governor's in charge, and let's make them successful. So partnerships are what we focus on. And part of that partnership event occurs inside the Pentagon every day. Being a member of the Joint Chiefs, I have access now to organizations that I probably never would have had as a 3-star and as just a chief and not a member of the Joint Chiefs. I get called into all the sessions as a member of the Joint Chiefs, and I'll give you a couple examples. During Boston bombings, I was called in immediately to sit with the Undersecretary of Defense and talk about what the Guard was doing in Boston. What was Governor Patrick planning on, and how was he going to respond when they shut the city down? Well, I already had information from the Adjutant General at that point that he had 450 troops in the city at the start of the event. They were there for security for the marathon. Immediately, the governor said, I'm going to authorize you over 1,000. Put them in the streets now. And let's start building a plan to back up the police force, and then let's get some up-armored vehicles out there that can escort the SWAT teams around as we begin to look for these 2 gentlemen that did the terrorist acts. I was able to take that information immediately and get it to the chairman and the secretary. During Hurricane Sandy, I probably spent 8 to 10 hours with Secretary Panetta over a 2-week period, 3 times where we actually briefed the president. He was usually on a call or he was on Air Force One, but I was able to bring that perspective directly from the Adjutant General and the Governor into the Pentagon. And about day 3 of this, when I was with Secretary Panetta and Corps of Engineers, who did a great job, the Defense Logistics Agency, who did a great job, and Northcom working very closely with them in case we were short anything, they would back us up. But what I found about day 3, I thought, I wonder who was talking for the states in this meeting before we were on the Joint Chiefs. Because there was nobody in the room that had ever done state active duty or even knew how it was organized. So at that point, I realized the real value of the being a member of the Joint Chiefs is bringing that information to that level of government. Because otherwise, if you don't have that level of information, for all the right reasons, you're going to overreact. If you don't know what a governor needs, we're very proactive in responding to the homeland. All of our agencies are. So that's a partnership, though, that we got to continue to build. That's the value added of having the chief on the National Guard. Other partnerships, though, and I'll close with this, is our state partnerships. And we bring a very unique program called the State Partnership Program. 65 state partners right now that exist for 71 countries where we team up a state with a relationship, a military-to-military relationship with a country. And this started after the fall of the Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc countries, and we aligned many of those countries with states 20 years ago. In fact, a number of them have just celebrated their 20th anniversary in 2013. We're continuing to add. I think in 2014 we'll probably add 4 more partnerships. We're working on those with combatant commands right now. And we bring the teams together and we build long-term partnerships. And we help those countries build capacity within their security enterprise. And I'll just leave you with the one bit of this. I mean, the one I really like and really focus on, it just occurred not too long ago. An offshoot of the partnership program was, as the war started, many of these countries wanted to assist. And the most recent one that just redeployed was a story out of Bosnia and Maryland. Bosnia and Maryland have a partnership that's actually the second partnership for Maryland. And we started a thing after 2003 where we would bring partner nations and we would plug units into them, or they would plug individuals or units into our formations and then deploy to Iraq or Afghanistan together. Poland did, I don't know how many deployments Poland did with Illinois. But the one that was very unique that kind of summarizes how great this partnership has grown, is Bosnia wanted to deploy. They had been deploying some ordnance units into Iraq, but they wanted to get in and deploy to Afghanistan to assist NATO and ISAF. And so 26 Bosnian military police embedded in a battalion, the 115th Battalion out of the Maryland Guard, and they deployed together to Afghanistan. And I sent my political advisor, Tom Nimlock, to Bosnia to be there for their welcome home this past fall. And the minister said, he said, hey, this was a fabulous event. You know, we were consumers of security in the past. Now we feel we can produce security as a part of the international community. And what's next for us? Where can we look to the future for support to peacekeeping operations in NATO and other organizations? So that kind of says a lot about what these partnerships have done over the years. And you know, well over 700 events we're doing per year. We do that whole thing for total dollar figure. The money we get in the National Guard's about $12 million a year. If you roll in some training dollars, it's about probably up to just less than $20 million a year. And believe it or not, that's the one account nobody wants to mess with because it gives you so much great engagement. And these countries that have deployed with us, 17 rotations, I think, or now it was actually 17 countries, 89 rotations into either Iraq or Afghanistan, where we plugged together like that. We're building capacity and capability for the future that will be able to help NATO. Thank you.
Thank you. What would you say is the biggest challenge the Guard faces right now? Maintenance, recruiting, funding, something else?
You know, there's two challenges that I think of. One is on the federal side and one's on the state side. And let me start with the federal side. This is a tremendous force we have. I would encourage every one of you, and we will work with you, to get out and see this force. We have to keep this force employed. We have to find challenging missions for them. As I've traveled, and I mentioned 25 states, and go out on drill weekend or annual training, these young men and women join because they think they're going to deploy or they're going to be challenged. If we go back to the strategic reserve that I joined, these young men and women will not stay with us. They will go find something else to do. They want to take the skill sets that they learn in the military and be able to apply them. So as the budgets get tighter, we've got to figure out how to get that right. And we have some ideas we're working on right now. On the state side, one of the big challenges, and it worries me every day, is a major catastrophe in the homeland. We have gotten very, very good. If there was a regional event occur right now, regional being, say, another Hurricane Sandy, even up to a Katrina, our government, our response agencies, even you know, working very closely with the state governments, we've gotten very good, great connectivity between us, being able to respond, know what's needed, know where the gaps are. I can tell you right now from hurricane season every year where the gaps are from the Guard, what we might need help in. So we've gotten very good at that. But when I think about, say, an 8.0 earthquake in the Cascadia reduction zone on the West Coast, or the Hayward Fault, you know, in San Francisco, Oakland Bay, or the New Madrid, or a Cat 5 hitting New York City, those concern me. And I know they concern Northcom, they concern Administrator Fugate, and we are spending a lot of time thinking through that. How do we respond at that level that we can get there quick?
Do you consider the National Guard to be in direct competition with the active service branches for defense dollars?
Well, there's one defense budget, so we all have to work off that one defense budget. And I tell the adjutants general that we're not immune, our appropriations are not immune from the Budget Control Act. So as long as we have a Budget Control Act, we're going to take reductions. What we've worked on is a proposal with the adjutant generals that would show how we could pay those bills and try to maintain a quality opportunity for anyone that wants to join the Guard today.
It's been widely reported that the Army and the Guard disagree on the way forward for the Army National Guard, and they've both put forward competing proposals for Secretary Hagel's consideration. Can you tell us about your plan and why you consider it the best course of action?
So if you look throughout history, go over the last, probably since World War II, the Guard's been pretty stable about where we're at as far as the Army and Air Guard in strength. One of the issues we're looking at right now, though, is if we have to take reductions to pay those bills, what does that look like? And those are the numbers we've been working with the Army and with the Air. I think we're in a pretty good place with the Air. We're still working through on discussions with the Army. And we know that we can take some reductions and maintain a quality force in the Guard and pay the Budget Control Act bill. As we move forward, though, everything we do is tied to our two services. The reason we have, our federal mission and our federal equipment is to do that federal mission when called upon. And as the active component loses money, we won't be able to modernize. We won't be able to send pilots to the schools that we need to as rapidly as we need to. We won't be able to get people into basic training and advanced schools. So we got to work very closely with the two services and make sure that we could win the battle and lose the opportunity to be able to train our folks because the training infrastructure comes from the Army and Air Force.
General Odierno was our speaker here on Tuesday, and he indicated in his opinion, there's currently a balance between the Army and the reserves, and that future cuts would likely come from the Guard and the reserves. Do you agree with his assessment?
So this is the hard part. In fact, General Dempsey and I talked about this one day when I first came in the job, when we were having actually a debate in the 13 budget with the Air Force. I said, what is the right mix between your active component that you need sitting there 24/7, ready to go, and your National Guard? That is the bulk of your National Guard force is a traditional force, and they're distributed in almost 3,000 communities. They roll out the gate quickly in their community, and they can be brought up to some standard pretty quickly. I mean, we train to the same standard. We're equipped the same. So what is that right balance? And that's what we're trying to find now. What is that right balance in there? The Air Guard has been working with the Air Force and the Air Reserve on a metric to kind of get at that discussion. I think there's been a lot of studies. We're pulling a lot of the studies off the shelf to look at that. The Guard offers a great opportunity for the nation to get this right. And when you talk about an insurance policy in a very unstable world, I think we are a good opportunity to pursue for the future.
General Odierno also said on Tuesday that the National Guard trains only 39 days a year and is therefore not interchangeable with the Army. Would you like to have a chance to respond to that? Sure.
Well, I will tell you as I've traveled that I've been trying to find the person that trains. I did train 39 days a year for a few years in about 71 and 72, and once you become a leader, even as a sergeant, you may get paid 39 days a year, but I would tell you those Guard men and women are in the Army once a week. The leaders are twice a week. I remember in the summers there wasn't a weekend that went by hardly that we weren't at a 2 or 3 or 4 hour meeting for something. So the idea of training 39 days a year, I'm not finding that anymore. And then if you figure also the schools our folks have to go to, and many of them have been able, the employers have been great to work with for most cases, that they've been able to get off their professional development schools and go away for 4 months to a branch school or to an NCO development course. The Air Guard. I mean, holy cow, the change in technology that's going on and the requirements that we have to get our folks to school. People have been leaving their jobs to go keep qualified, and technology is changing so rapidly. Not only that, of course, with the widespread use of electronic media and electronic education, a lot of our folks are doing work on their own. Sometimes they're doing college classes, online or attending college, just so they can be competitive for the next grade. So the idea of doing 39 days a year, to me, doesn't exist anymore.
The Army and the Guard are said to be in dispute over end strength. What do you see as an acceptable reduction for the Guard, and how would you describe the status of discussions on that topic?
I think it starts with the debate and discussion we're having right now is, and this really boils up to the leadership of the nation that will be working through this, is if we can only afford a certain amount, whether it's active or Guard, what can we accept on active duty, and what can we put into the Guard and Reserve to be ready at some state of readiness? For the Guard, we have the opportunity to also have that, that constitutionally driven dual mission and be available to the governors. So I think as we move forward here with the budget, we've got to figure that one out, and we can't get that wrong for the nation. If you put everything on the active more and you draw down the Guard more, which we're not, and there's no proposals to do that, but then you're paying a huge bill, and compensation at some point in the future is going to catch up with you where, you'll be only paying salaries and you won't be able to modernize. If you put everything into the Guard, you won't have that 9/11 force that's ready to go and deploy overseas because people have jobs and things like that. So somewhere in there is the balance that we've got to find.
Do you expect to go to Congress with a unified plan with the Army, or will there still be dispute on that?
Looking at the Budget Control Act, and I was looking at some charts yesterday, we've got some relief here for a few years. So what we don't want to do is rush into failure. We've got some relief with the $22 billion added and the $9 billion added. That gives us a few years to look at this. And we're tightening belts left and right. We're looking at the changes in units for the future. I don't know, if General Airmen talked about it, but there's a potential, that if we're designing a force for 20 years from now, that force may look a whole lot different than it does today. I mean, if you go back 15 years ago and you look at our force compared to what we fought the war with, totally different in how we're doing business. So, the threat gets a vote, but also I think there's opportunities to look at how we're headed forward, what types of capabilities do we need in the Homeland and the Guard, and we need for our support to the Air Force and Army. And then as we look to the future, how does that money shake out among that? When we get beyond the next 2 years, do we stay on path with the Budget Control Act? What's Congress going to do? Can we get to a point where we can find enough efficiencies and savings to do the missions, to do the strategy, to do the Asia-Pacific shift, and still do that within the budget? And I'm very mindful our appropriations are being hit by the Budget Control Act just as the other services are. So as we look out to, at least for the next the next POM cycle, we're going to be looking very closely to get the best force we can for the money. And some of that's going to be reducing the size of the overhead.
What role do you see for the Army Reserves as a partner on the three-component team?
This is an interesting one because I get criticized sometimes, but actually Jeff Talley and I are good friends. I was a traditional guardsman as a captain in the St. Louis District with the Corps of Engineers, civilian there, but then I worked in the Guard as a traditional. Jeff was an active duty captain as a project engineer, so we worked together way back then. And I think there's some opportunities here. The opportunity, I think, that we have with the Reserve right now is, I give you the example of the dual status command. That dual status command, the reason that was designed was to avoid the confusion of unity of effort and unity of command in a crisis in the homeland. So you have one commander who sees the whole picture. And that one commander, he or she, is answering to the governor on one hat and to the president, Secretary of Defense on the other hat. I think as we shake out this discussion on a serious incident in the United States, and I gave you some of the scenarios earlier, let's just say the New Madrid. If there's a New Madrid quake of 8.0, and if you study it back in 1811, 1812, for about 3 months, that fault line shook, and off and on with aftershocks, and it rang church bells in Philadelphia. That's how much potential disaster that this could bring. If you think about today, and I always think about this, the Mississippi, the Missouri, the Ohio rivers, so much commerce goes up and down those. Even if the bridges don't collapse, they've all got to be inspected. Guess where all the power is? There's mostly coal-fired electric plants all up and down that river. There's locks and dams. There's so much commodities that go up and down those rivers that if we have a major disaster in using that New Madrid, I think we're going to need every force we can get our hands on to respond and take care of the people of the United States. And that's where the dual status commander comes in. And I think if we work with the reserves and we work with the department, we can figure out a way so that those local units can come in under a Title X when the governor requests. If the governor is short, pick a topic, they're short engineers. And a governor requests, the last thing we want to do is to wait for somebody to get there, especially if they live right there. But the key is the governor's out of assets. The governor can't get assets from the Guard any longer because we're out. That he requested or she requested, we want to be able to move in quickly. And that takes coordination in advance to do it right.
What's the potential for the Guard taking back the Sinai and Kosovo missions, and what's the value of having Guardsmen perform those versus soldiers?
Actually, in the first year in the job, I've had a chance to visit Kosovo, and I had been there years ago, and visited the Sinai as well. And the mission there fits so well for our Guardsmen. Most of our Guardsmen are a bit older. They're mature. I was at one of the outposts in the Sinai, and it's a great opportunity there to train a young squad leader. There's a 7-person team out there on the top of this mountain, and you had a staff sergeant there, and then you had a young E5 sergeant, and the staff sergeant allowed the E5 to run that site, and we were grooming him for the future. He's going to go back home, and that's going to pay us benefits and leadership for years because he knows how to work a mission. He knows how to form his team to respond to the needs there. In the Sinai, of course, we've been doing that mission for a long time. Kosovo, the same thing. It even goes above that, though, because now you get into working in an interagency, coalition warfare organization in a peacekeeping operation and the logistics it takes to support that. One of the things I saw in Kosovo was the civilian skill sets spinning out of what we do. And even before some of the humanitarian aid that was been provided, and has been quite a bit assisting, we saw organizations coming in from the Guard, and they would set up a humanitarian effort, and they would reach back to their home and bring forward. One case was remember the old 286 computers? Some of you don't, but some of the old computers. All they needed in some of these little towns were just computers that you could put an old floppy drive and put a lesson on or something like that. So they had a bunch of those shipped over. So the humanitarian effort there, the Guard was able to reach in, and they had folks in their unit that knew how to set up a network and things like that. So there's opportunities there. General Odierno, I've talked about it. The off-ramping you heard about, which is always problematic. Most of that has occurred was driven by two things. One was fiscal constraints last year. The second is the drawdown of forces. We have agreed that the Guard will stay engaged. Today, there's almost 20,000, I think it's 19,800 Guard men and women mobilized, Air and Army today. So when people say, well, aren't you concerned about it? We're still almost 20,000. Who would have ever thought of that? I think the right number is going to be around 5,000, maybe a brigade every year that will keep us those opportunities. But what's even more important is that we have the opportunity to capitalize on our training periods, on our annual training especially. And some of that may require a 3-week annual training to do an overseas mission. The Air Guard has mastered this. In many cases, we've had missions where an exercise needed an Air Guard platform and support, and we were able to pull that out and help the Air Force in a declining budget.
How have have these frequent deployments and activations affected recruitment and retention in the Army and Air National Guards?
Well, with the two directors, the deputy director and director here, could tell you that our strength is doing great. Our strength is fabulous. Our readiness, our personnel readiness, our medical readiness, dental readiness is at a higher state than it's ever been in both the Air National Guard and the Army Guard. Now, a lot of that is because we've had the resources to do that, to make sure the medical and dental was always kept up every year. And I've been out to visit some of the soldier readiness process and the Air Guard readiness processes. So as those resources dry up, we're concerned that, that will decline over time, but it's a priority we're going to have for the future. The recruiting piece, one of the concerns I have for the future is, are we going to be able to have opportunities for those Army and Air, Marines, Navy personnel coming off of active duty that want to continue to serve as the Army, especially the Army and Marines, draw down? Will we have opportunities to capitalize on their skills and get them into the Guard? And why that's so important to us from a recruiting perspective, General Ingram, and I know not so much on the Air side because they have continued to draw a pretty good number from active duty, but on the Army side, we were probably running closer to a 50% prior service and a 50% non-prior service when the war started. That meant, 50% of our force was coming off of active duty into the Guard before the war started. As we went into the war and everyone saw the Guard deployments, 2, 3, 4 deployments, 760,000 Army and Air Guard deployed, a lot of folks that got off of active duty, well, they were starting their careers, their families. They knew if they joined the Guard, they were just going to go on another rotation. They may have had 2 or 3 deployments already. So what happened, it was we shifted, and today we're probably sitting at about 20% prior service and 80% non-prior service. That's very costly. Because if we can bring in a trained soldier or airman off the street, out of the service into our units, we save her. If we can shift that back closer to 50-50, that will be a big help for the future. But right now, we're still setting close, I think, Bill, it's close to about 20-80. And the other thing that will happen, though, is if we can shift closer to a 50% prior and 50% non-prior, we're going to save money in our recruiting and have to work, if you look at the population, I just read a report. 3 out of 10 high school students graduating today fully meet the criteria for the U.S. military without waivers. So that's the competition. And oh, by the way, those same 3 are the same ones that are getting scholarships to big universities and things that we're going to compete with. So we've got to get that shift and try to draw more prior in.
Do you think that National Guard soldiers and airmen and their families are being treated differently than active duty soldiers on their return home?
We've, Chief Brush, my wingman and battle buddy there. Of course, I will say one thing real quick. Chief Brush is only here and is only as good as he is because Blair, his wife, makes sure that he gets up in the morning, he gets his uniform on, and he can serve. But Chief Brush will tell you, we've been out traveling together, working with the states and the Guard. And I think that, I'm going to shift your question for a minute, but I think what we're going to see as we move forward here, that this force that we have is going to leave us if we don't challenge them first, and that we're going to find, what we've already found some of, is an older force going back in time. And I think what Bill, you probably saw in the Army Guard definitely was the age. As you get older, you have more physical problems and things. So the force declines in readiness, and we can't let that happen. But Chief and I are committed to making sure that every soldier we have is treated properly, no matter what age. And we see as we go around to some of the warrior transition units where people are recovering from an injury or a wound, that the older folks takes longer to heal. So a younger force is always going to be more healthy. When we hear about a treatment of a guardsman or woman different than an active, we are right on top of it. And to give you an example, we just had a state that returned. The Adjutant General, and I won't go into the details of specifics, but he sends me a note and says, our guys got pushed off to the side. said, hey, move out of the way. We got another unit coming through. Guard, you're going to have to wait. And that was just one small incident by one person. We pass that up through the chain. That information gets to the Army, gets to Forces Command, and they will have First Army, who Commander Mike Tucker came out and spent some time with the adjutant generals. First thing he did, he will go out and make sure that that doesn't happen again. And our warrior transition units, I've asked Chief to go out and visit those warrior transition units and spend time with them to make sure our folks are being taken care of, and also to make sure that people are, getting well and getting back to their civilian lives and getting back home. So something we're definitely concerned about. We're going to continue to watch, but it's not like it was when we first started mobilizing at all. It was pretty ugly when we first started mobilizing because we mobilized the support base at the same time we mobilized the forces.
Two related questions that I'll ask is, one, first, how were you able to persuade the 5 recalcitrant state National Guards to implement Secretary's Hagel Directive to provide equal benefits to same-sex military couples? And as a part 2 to that, what is the status of Governor Perry refusing to abide by that federal mandate?
Well, let me just talk about from when Secretary Hagel said, hey, you need to fix this. Something that hit home for me in the process was we had a soldier, a same-sex marriage couple, and she was killed in Afghanistan, fighting her nation. And I watched how that state handled it. Even though they didn't recognize same-sex benefits, they didn't recognize marriage at that point. This was well before Secretary Hagel had said, hey, we got to make this work after DOMO, was overturned. And to me, that was a soldier. I don't care, it doesn't make me any difference. It's a soldier, and we got to take care of that soldier. So we called the adjutants general on the phone, brought him in, and said, look, we got to fix this. And we understand that, we're kind of in the middle of this, and there's state constitutional issues, there's statute issues, there's an attorney general that's got to be involved. Our legal framework within defense has got to be involved. And we just worked every day to find a solution that did not violate state constitution and state laws. And I got to applaud the states because many of them worked really hard in a very, very short order to make it work so that we could extend benefits to whoever is serving in the military.
And what about Texas?
Yeah, actually, we've actually had a very good working relationship with them. And right now, we're not actually having any problems. I don't know of any situation where we've denied benefits.
Can you bring us up to speed also on the military suicide issue that's, of course, affected all branches? How much of a problem is it in the Guard, and do you think that the Guard and the military overall need to take more steps to address it?
This is a problem, and it's a serious problem within our society, and it just bothers me, really bothers me. I'm sure it bothers all of you. We've been working through with some of the school systems in where our armories are in hometown, and what would drive someone to take their own life. I have a Rear Admiral who works on my staff as a liaison to Health and Human Services. And she has done a fabulous job at reaching into the research community and trying to get a hold of what's happening here within the society. And the problem for the Guard is we're so distributed out there that you don't see someone every day. You may see them once a week or, on drill weekend. When you're deployed, you spend more time, but half of the suicides are folks who haven't even deployed. So what has happened in our society, and how can we partner with the communities? And we have one state right now that is working that because of a couple of suicides that occurred both in a school district as well as in the Guard. And they're working through to see how we can partner. But there is a problem within the society that we've got to deal with. And of course, we bring in that normal age group that brings, whenever you touch America and you bring into the Guard America, you're going to have the same kind of issues. We have psychological health professionals in every state. And we're getting ready to make some changes. We've had contract psychological health to deal with this, make them available for hometown America for the families as well as the service members. And then educate all their membership that these are available. And if you see someone that's not acting right, or you see someone that's having a problem, and most of the issues we deal with are financial, relationships, or drug and alcohol depression. So what we try to do is make sure everyone knows there's healthcare professionals that can come and you can talk to, and you can do it, anonymously. The Air Guard, though, we just shifted right now. We're shifting some resources, and we're going to change those from a contract to a civilian position within the Guard, so that they are there all the time. They will begin to understand the community. They'll begin to understand the demographics. They'll have the connectivity with the healthcare professionals in the area. We're looking at doing some of the same for the long term. I would tell you one of the concerns I have, and I think we partner very closely with the Veterans Administration, is that as we draw down the force, if we don't do anything else right now, the Army's going to come down 70,000 from the growth that they had, for the surge. The Marines are coming down some. All those individuals, those great Americans that have served their nation in time of war, are coming back to hometown America. We don't know as a nation yet what 12 years of war does to people, or does to families. 12 years of war, you have young 30-year-olds out there that have had, 5 years in combat. We won't know the impacts. So we got to be prepared to work that in. We think our armories are a good place to start working that distribution network up through the state headquarters.
We are, unfortunately, almost out of time, but before asking one last question, I have a couple of housekeeping matters to take care of. First of all, I'd like to remind you about our upcoming speakers. Tomorrow, January 10th, we will have Joe Boardman, Chairman and CEO of Amtrak. January 15th, we will have Christine Lagarde, Managing Director of the IMF. And on January 21st, DeMaurice Smith, the Executive Director of the NFL Players Association. Secondly, I would like to present our guest with the traditional National Press Club coffee mug. So now with two of the Joint Chiefs, you can bring these to the meetings and share.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And one last question. Our audience is curious about your first meeting once you got to the Joint Chiefs. It was a big deal to get the 4-star and be there. Was there any sort of hazing that went along with that?
As the chairman reminds me ever so often, he says, you asked for this, right? Yes, Chairman, I did. I couldn't ask for a better reception by the Joint Chiefs. They deal with very, very difficult issues, and the history behind the position and when they went to the Senate to testify. But I have bounced things off of Chairman Dempsey. He's been a wonderful partner across the board. I've been welcomed. I've been to all the events, the Joint Chiefs. I think the thing that really catches you when you're sitting there the first time and you're thinking, okay, any issues in the homeland today, anything on mobilization, you're thinking through that, and then all of a sudden, there's this. So what's your thoughts on Syria? What really hits you at that point is that you have to make sure you've created an organization that can respond to that level. And not just to the homeland, because even though I'm an advisor for the non-federalized, I have to vote, I have to give my opinion to the Secretary of Defense and the President on all topics that involve defense. So you have to get your staff ready, and it's an investment in time and resources and training and development. And I would applaud both the Army and Air because they're offering us opportunities to put people into positions that will help us grow for the future. And I will leave you with one thought. I need to do this if that's okay. This is who your Guard is today. And I'm just going to recognize as a Master Sergeant, Michael Lansbury. And some of you have heard this on the news. This is truly who your Guard, even though he lost his life. I could pick any Master Sergeant out there or private and be the same response. But Michael Lansbury, Sparks Middle School teacher, Marine Corps veteran, Nevada Air National Guard Master Sergeant, lost his life protecting his students when a 12-year-old walked in armed with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun and opened fire on the school campus in October. That's who your Guard is today. Thank you.
Thank you, General Grass, for coming today. I'd also like to thank the National Press Club staff, including our Journalism Institute and Broadcast Center, for helping organize today's event. Finally, here's a reminder, you can find more information about the National Press Club, as well as a transcript and video of today's program on our website at www.press.org. Thank you. We are adjourned.
Congratulations.